The history of secret societies is usually told as a story about rituals, symbols, and shadowy figures, pulling levers from behind the curtain. That is not the story I want to tell tonight. Tonight, I want to talk about the conditions that make secret societies possible in the first place. Because every organization this channel has covered this week was not inevitable. Each one emerged at a specific documentable moment in history when something in the official system failed completely. And that failure created the exact conditions that allowed a private network to fill the gap. The thesis is this: secret societies do not emerge randomly. They emerge at the moment when official institutions collapse, and a new elite decides it needs a private structure to hold on to power outside of public accountability. 3 organizations this week, 3 moments of collapse, 1 pattern. Chapter 1. The Ahnenerbe and the Academic Crisis. The Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research Organization of the SS, was founded in 1935 by Heinrich Himmler. Most people know it as the occult science arm of the Nazi regime. What fewer people know is why it was possible. In 1900, German universities were the most respected academic institutions in the world. Physics, chemistry, medicine, anthropology. German scholars dominated every field. The Nobel Prize had only existed since 1901, and German researchers were collecting a disproportionate share almost from the beginning. By 1935, those same institutions were producing racial pseudoscience for a government department. What happened in between is the actual story. The answer is not that German academics were uniquely evil. The answer is that German academic institutions experienced a catastrophic collapse. Between 1919 and 1933, that collapse made a generation of credentialed researchers available for exactly the kind of project Himmler had in mind. Stage 1. Hyperinflation. Between 1921 and 1923, the German mark became worthless. Academic salaries, already modest, became meaningless. Research funding evaporated. Universities that had operated with confidence and resources for decades found themselves unable to pay their staff or heat their buildings. Researchers who had built careers on the assumption of institutional support found that support gone. Stage 2. Political infiltration. Throughout the 1920s, Völkisch nationalist movements actively recruited inside German universities. They were not fringe organizations. They had money, organization, and an explicit political agenda. By the late 1920s, nationalist student organizations controlled student governments at major German universities. The academic culture was shifting before Hitler took power. Stage 3. The 1933 purge. When the Nazis took power, Jews and political opponents were expelled from German academic positions. This was approximately 25% of the German academic workforce. Some left the country. Many did not. The purge destabilized every institution it touched and left behind a workforce that had watched the rules change overnight and understood that survival now required cooperation. Himmler recognized this. He did not invent the Ahnenerbe from nothing. He recruited from a pool of legitimate academics who had lost their positions, their funding, and their stability. He offered resources, status, and a sense of mission. What he asked for in return was the use of their credentials to legitimate his racial mythology. The Ahnenerbe was not fringe pseudoscience operating at the margins. It was a state-funded institution employing holders of genuine academic degrees, publishing under legitimate scholarly apparatus. That was the crisis condition that made it possible. The institutions that should have said no had been systematically dismantled before anyone thought to ask the question. Chapter 2. The Thule Society and the 1918 Collapse. The Thule Society emerged from a different German crisis. These were separate moments, though involving the same country. The 1918 crisis was military and political. The Ahnenerbe's crisis was institutional and intellectual. 17 years apart, they produced two entirely different organizations. Germany did not experience the end of World War I like victorious nations. No steady deterioration, no sense of inevitable defeat. German troops fought on foreign soil when armistice came. The home front received positive communiques until the end. The armistice felt like betrayal from within, not defeat from without, to many Germans. This birthed the stab in the back narrative. Germany was betrayed by socialists, communists, and Jewish politicians. It was false, a consequential lie. It circulated within weeks of the armistice. The Thule Society emerged directly then. Founded 1918 in Munich by Rudolf von Sebottendorf. It drew from Völkisch networks, protecting Aryan culture against perceived betrayers. But Thule was more than an occult club. It had money, connections, and a political agenda. It funded a newspaper, supported political figures. Members became Nazi Party founders, including Dietrich Eckart, who mentored Hitler, and Anton Drexler, co-founder of the NSDAP. The 1918 crisis created something specific: educated German men. They served in a just war, returned to a disloyal government, lacking explanation. The Thule Society provided that structure. It provided a mythology, a community, and an enemy. That is what a private network does when official institutions fail. It gives people something to belong to. Chapter 3: P2 Lodge and the Cold War Crisis. The Propaganda du Lodge, known as P2, is the third crisis case, and in some ways the most instructive. Its crisis was not one of collapse, but of transition. Italy in 1945 faced a problem shared by every Western ally. One nobody wanted to acknowledge publicly. The fascist state had collapsed. Mussolini was dead. But those who ran the fascist state, administrators, military officers, police officials, businessmen, intelligence operatives, had not disappeared. They were still in Italy, connected, and skilled at exactly what they knew how to do. In 1947 and 1948, this problem became urgent. The Italian Communist Party was one of the largest in the Western world, a serious electoral contender. A communist victory in Italy was catastrophic for both the CIA and the Vatican. The CIA's response is well documented. Operation Gladio, NATO's stay-behind network, provided infrastructure. The Vatican provided legitimacy and funding channels. The 1948 crisis. A democratic system functioned, but the wrong people might win. The response was to construct a parallel structure, influencing outcomes regardless of elections. P2 was the mechanism through which that parallel structure took institutional form. It recruited from Freemasonry, the military, banking, and politics. Its membership, seized in 1981, included 2 future prime ministers, 3 defense ministers, and the heads of all 3 major Italian intelligence services simultaneously. The crisis condition that created P2 was not collapse. It was the fear of democratic accountability. The institutions were functioning, and functioning in a way that the existing elite found threatening. P2 was the response. So, what happened to those who named these secret societies? The 3 organizations this week were all eventually exposed. None of the exposures were clean. The Ahnenerbe faced its closest thing to accountability at the Nuremberg doctors' trial in 1946 and 1947. 23 defendants, 7 death sentences, 9 acquittals. Several who received prison sentences were released by 1955. The trial addressed the most visible crimes. It did not address the full scope of the Ahnenerbe's operations. Most of the archaeologists, linguists, and expedition leaders were never charged. The files seized from Ahnenerbe archives in 1945 have not all been fully declassified. The Thule Society was never formally prosecuted. It dissolved itself before the Nazis took power, its networks having moved into the Nazi Party itself. Journalists in Munich who had documented Thule membership found themselves in danger. Several were among the civilians killed during the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923. P2 came apart most recently and most publicly. When the membership list was found in Licio Gelli's villa in 1981, it produced a constitutional crisis. The sitting prime minister resigned. Roberto Calvi, the banker connected to P2, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London in June 1982, with bricks stuffed in his pockets. Italian authorities initially ruled it a suicide. The British coroner returned an open verdict. 3 separate Italian investigations followed. Nobody has been convicted of his murder. The pattern across all 3 is consistent. The societies emerged from crises. They built real power. When they were exposed, the exposure was partial and the accountability was selective. Secret societies are not aberrations. They are what power looks like when it decides it no longer needs to explain itself.